causes this. One leads to another, leads to death. And that's what's going to happen. There's blood in the water as far as my business being broke into daily. Many of you may not know that I did sue the city at 800 calls. It went to 12,000 calls, went to 18,000 calls. Now, I laid low. I didn't really go after them, I took that money from the first settlement and offered it back for commercial garbage pickup, a medic, and then also basically a counselor. No one took that money. I offered it to the assembly. Where we're at now is history repeated itself. Carlick Street is lined on both sides of the street. The sexual assaults that I witnessed are tear-jerking, and the filth there is terrible. And it's not getting any better because now I have the 150 to, I'm going to say 200 tents to the west, the low barrier shelter, 120 with a maximum of 240 to the east, and Carlick Street. If you all have to watch YouTube, the last stop on Carlick Street. So if you watch that, but you destroyed me. I'm here to sell you the property. I want to arrange for a presentation of at least 10 minutes to show you why the best investment you could make is buy my property and expand the low barrier shelter, the navigation center, and get the homeless from the old Native Hospital site into a secured area next to the navigation center.
Thank you, Mr. Oliva.
Well, you're more than welcome, Felix, as always. And if there in a remote possibility, there's possibly a question.
Thanks, Mr.
I'd be
Oliva.
more
I'm just
than
looking
happy
to
to
see if there
answer
are any questions, and I do not see any from my colleagues. Thank you so much. Just want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Perez-Verdia and Ms. Brawley. As always, I try to do my best to reserve time at the end of the meeting for final audience participation. So let's go ahead and move on to unfinished business. There's a few items that are tabled on our agenda so that we can primarily focus on the big topic items that we have before us. Okay. Good news, I have confirmed that the OCS presentation, which has been on our agenda for quite a while, will be happening in August. I don't know why my notes said October. Will be happening in August. So looking forward to having that presentation next month. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So what we're going to do, I'm going to have to change the agenda a little bit because the folks who are here from DEC have to leave at about 11:45. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start with DEC and then do the emergency cold weather shelter plan and end with the Golden Lion. So let's, the Department of Law requested this item be added on our agenda to get updates on the situation at the Forest Park Mobile Home Park in Chugach. So let's go ahead and pass out those letters. And then before I turn it over to the DEC, I guess the one, does the member from Chugach Eagle River want to give any updates or opening remarks?
Well, you know, when we passed the requesting an extension for the Forest Park abatement, 90 days, there's been a task force that's been meeting about every 10 days. I'm anxious to see what the communication is from DEC. I know it's been a long, ongoing process. It's great to finally have some communication because, you know, during this entire process that many members from the community, Neighbor Works, myself and individuals, there hasn't been a whole lot of communication. I don't recall anybody from the municipality showing up at any of the meetings or any communication from the DEC. So I'm really looking forward to what they have to say. And I hope there's some way that we can prevent adding another several dozen people to our homeless streets. But let's proceed. Thank you. Oh, and one more item, Chair, if I may. I'd like a request from the chair to make a judgment on whether or not I have a conflict of interest. It's been brought up that because I own real estate in Chugach Eagle River, that is a direct conflict of interest regarding issues regarding Forest Park, and that I should not be serving on the task force. As I agree, I get these looks. I concur. I own B3 property, commercial property, and I own residential property in Chugach Eagle River. Does the fact that I own real estate in Chugach Eagle River mean that is that a direct conflict of interest in order to help the citizens of Forest Park? And I would fall on the chair to handle these allegations head on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cross. So I think for the specific purposes of this meeting and for my authority as a chair of this convening, I think I'm going to have to narrow my ruling to this specific meeting. I would ask that if you have any other ethics requests beyond the scope of this meeting, that you go to the ethics board and ask them specifically. But for the purposes of this meeting, I see no reason, since we are not going to be taking any votes on this issue, why you cannot participate substantively in the conversation.
Thank you.
Okay. And then I guess before we turn over to DEC, does Law want to add anything briefly?
We've just adding in, this is an update. The administration has coordinated with DEC to put together sort of a comprehensive understanding of history, where we are currently, and what's going on. It's a very high level letter that's been passed out to y'all. There's many more details, most of which are in the public record, either through the DEC state court case or through the municipality's efforts, or just generally in the public record. If there's any questions, we're happy to provide that information to you. And just a request from Law, if the 30 and 60-day reports on short and long-term solutions for Forest Park, I don't believe we were copied on those, but if we could possibly get a copy of those, that would be appreciated. But I'll then turn it over to Commissioner Bruni.
And before you introduce yourself, Commissioner, just for the folks on the phone, please make sure that you're muted. Go ahead.
For the record, my name is Jason. Thank you. Sorry. For the record, my name is Jason Bruni. I'm the Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation. Mr. Chair, members of the Assembly, thank you so much for your service to our community, and I really appreciate you addressing this issue today. And I am committed to working collaboratively with you on addressing this. Just with respect to Assemblyman Cross's statement, I'm going to respectfully disagree with that. I worked with Mayor Berkowitz, with the acting mayor after that, with Mayor Bronson, with Amy Dembowski, with previous. I mean, I've been working on this issue since I became commissioner. So to represent that, going to finally have some communication on that, I'm sorry, I'm going to respectfully disagree. I've been engaged on this issue from day one. I'm all about accountability. I'm all about holding people to a high standard. And I'm also all about making sure that we're solving this homeless issue. My brother-in-law lived on the streets here in Anchorage for 40 years before he committed suicide. So this issue is personal to me. But I'm also, my job as commissioner of DEC is to ensure we're protecting human health and the environment. When slumlords are allowed to have people pay rent for the better part of decades with the assumption that they will be receiving clean drinking water and not having daylighting sewage where their children may be playing, and those two small little creature comforts aren't occurring, my job is to hold them accountable, and I'm going to. And I've tried, and I've worked very closely to try to ensure that these people are taken care of, and they haven't been. For over a decade, there's been violations, notices of violations issued by DEC. Back in 2020, the municipality issued a dangerous building notice of violation to the people there. This is 3 years ago. Last spring, we worked very closely with Mayor Bronson, with previously with Amy Dembowski, and with Assembly person, with different members of the Assembly, to try to give a safe way out for these people. We gave the municipality gave a 6-month eviction notice to these people last April, saying, take care of this. And we tried, by the way, working with Mr. Ritz prior to that. I worked with Senator Murkowski, with Mark Corsentino, who's the head of AWWU, to try to find potential solutions. $35 million, I believe, is the cost for upgrading this system. To bring in, to connect it with the municipal AWWU system. I just met with Mark Corsentino yesterday to talk about this issue as well when I was out at the plant. It could potentially be decreased in cost, but we're looking at roughly $20 million for the sewage and around 10 or so million to connect to a piped water. These numbers were kind of mid pre-pandemic before all the inflation issues occurred. So my bet is those numbers are low. Again, I talked with Senator Murkowski about trying to get this added to the list. There's all sorts of needs that we have throughout the state for upgrading water and wastewater systems. We have 32 unserved communities throughout the state. The delegation has put over $2 billion into the neighbor work. So at the time that we were working, when I was working very closely with Mayor Bronson, with Amy Dabowski and others, NeighborWorks came in and was willing to help relocate people. We had EJA money, we had other funds to help move people out, to find them new opportunities. And for many, we did. For some, they did not want to leave. I understand that. What's really disgusting to me is that Mr. Ritz and Cindy Johnson, who was doing some of the managing, have subsequently reopened this place to folks to move in. We are taking advantage of the least fortunate of the least fortunate. I work very closely with Catholic Social Services. My son has done work with the refugee program to try to provide soccer gear for them as they're coming in. It's a great program. The refugees are the people that are being targeted at this place. They don't know better. They don't know what they don't know to be able to. They just think that they have a little slice of heaven. They don't recognize that the services they should be provided, clean drinking water, clean wastewater, should come with such a location. This is not a conservative issue. This is not a social, like a left or a right issue. This is a issue about what is right. And we've been trying to do what is right. When this eviction notice was given 6 months ago, or not 6 months ago, back in April of last year, giving that amount of time for these people to move out, and our commitment to working with NeighborWorks and others to find new locations, and new people kept on coming in at that time. There were appeals, and I went to these appeals with your city building committee, and they appealed that. And my understanding was, until I showed up, they likely were going to win the appeal. And then because I heard some totally misstatements were being made, I came and, from what I've been told, turned the tide, and they did not win the appeal. That said, they brought it before the judge because it got to October, and it's like, hardship, winter's coming, we can't find a new place for these folks. So the judge said we're going to extend it to April 30th. I understand that. That's being that's using your heart. But then my understanding was the assembly, and it's your prerogative, got engaged and wanted to have this study. What I'm fearful of is we're going to study this damn thing to death, and we're already in mid-July. Your results of this study are going to be coming out. Then we're going to issue another eviction notice, and then there's going to be another appeal, and then there's going to be another winter hardship, and the folks are going to be there for another winter, and we'll be doing the same damn thing again next April. Hope is not a solution. Putting your head in the sand is not a solution. These people, during a pandemic and the time following, are being exposed to daylighting sewage and not having safe drinking water. The individual that owns this place refuses to do the upgrades. He's now declared bankruptcy. He is nothing short of a slumlord. These aren't the type of people we should be encouraging to run our facilities. Now, I get it. You said that, several dozen people will be added to the homeless streets Assembly Cross. Hundreds. There is over 100 people that are living here. It was down. New people have moved in within the last few months. They're marketing this place to the least fortunate of the least fortunate. It gobsmacks me. Mr. Chair, I could pontificate about this for hours. We want to help. NeighborWorks was helping. The number of people increased significantly, but when we put our head in the sands, more people use the community to move back there. We've tried to work with the delegation. We've tried to find funding opportunities. Has been ignoring his court dates. He has perjured himself. He has all sorts of violations. He was just accused of violating the conditions of his role, but when he was arraigned or whatever it is. I'm not a lawyer. So, but he wasn't allowed to leave the municipality. He left the municipality last week. So he was arrested for that. There are continuing signs, and he's recently declared bankruptcy, which means he's not going to fix this problem. So I commit myself and my team at DEC. I have folks online that are listening to this, respectful of anything we can do to help these individuals, but we can't continue to ignore this problem. Mr. Chair, I'll yield my time and thank you for the opportunity and happy to answer any questions. And I also, by the way, have Garrison from Law and Emma, the Deputy Commissioner of DEC here, and Cindy from Fairbanks as my head of drinking water. If there's specific questions that I don't know the answers to, I can get those answers for you. And the letter that we provided you, I met with Mayor Bronson last week and like 8 members of his team. We provided the background that you should have all received that letter. It's a joint letter signed by Mayor Bronson and I that talks about this issue. And again, I'm committed, as is Bronson, to working with you to try to find a solution to this problem. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks. So I have a few things to just ground the conversation and make sure I'm understanding some of the conclusions in this letter. First thing is, though, and I just want it on the record just to confirm that, and perhaps Mr. Bird, you can do this. This letter, I see that it is signed by the mayor. So just want to confirm, and it has the logo of the municipality of Anchorage, that this letter and everything stated in it is the position of the administration.
That is correct, through the chair.
Okay, thanks. So then I guess going to the moving forward section, which is on page 3 of 5, in here, and I'm just reading this for the first time. So in here, it looks like there's 2 different sections. One is talking about short term and then one is talking about long term. Is it correct in my reading of this that basically the short term option that this letter comes to is we just have to remove residents from this particular, what the letter describes as a harmful situation? So am I reading that right?
Mr. Chair, I mean, that is the ideal. There are short-term solutions, though, with respect to hauling water and other things that we absolutely could do, but it's not inexpensive. We're talking, on average, probably $1,000 or more for hauling water was the estimates that I got on a monthly basis. My utility bill with AWWU is 1/10 of that, and I'm grumpy about it. So I'm confident that the lower income folks that live in these probably couldn't afford that. So that would need municipal assistance. And then as far as the issue with the waste, that's another issue in and of itself.
Great, thanks. And then am I also understanding that the long-term solution, actually, rather than me describe it, I'm wondering if someone from either Department of Law or DEC could describe the long-term solution that's outlined in here.
Certainly, Chair. Ben Bowman, Assistant Municipal Attorney, through the Chair. The long-term solution as it's kind of been laid out is due to the lack of communication with the owners, as has been as was described by Commissioner Bruni. There's kind of a lack of understanding of precisely what's on the ground. We know the drinking water system, the originally installed drinking water system, is completely defunct. The temporary system, which is described in the letter and as sort of garden hoses on the ground, is not a viable long-term solution. So the long-term solution would be creating a proper drinking water system, which would involve engineers and technical experts who would come in and do the actual design per DEC standards. There's also a question about what well to be used. There's one well on the property, and then there's a well just across the street of the church. The well on the property is currently being used to feed the system. That well was disconnected several years ago and it has some issues. It doesn't have testing. It's close to areas of contamination, and it would have to be gone through a DEC process, which I might turn over to Garrison if you want more details on that, because he Mr. Todd of the DEC knows those regulations much better than I do, but it would be creating a water system on the property that meets standard and can be then implied. That's an effort of engineers and then construction, not to mention the funding for both of those things. For the wastewater, there has been ongoing repeated reports of, daylighting or intermittent issues. There's a attachment to the letter which has sort of a timeline of the different things that DEC has reports and actions that DEC has taken regarding the wastewater system. DEC stepped, and I'm speaking for them, so they'll correct me if I say something wrong. DEC stepped aside from the wastewater issue in 2021 to focus on drinking water because it was deemed more pertinent. But for the long-term wastewater solution, first, again, you'd have to get an engineer out there to do an engineer's report of the actual wastewater system, probably running cameras through those various transport pipes, seeing if there's breaks in them, where those breaks are, if the system is replaceable or repairable, and if it is, replacing and repairing, or going in and putting in a new system in the worst case scenario. Again, one of the challenges being money.
Got it. Thanks. All right, we're going to go ahead and go through the queue, starting with Mr. Cross.
Thank you. Yeah. So, and I appreciate that, everybody. I know it goes back a long time. And part of the struggle is that, yes, there's, depending on who you ask, you get different kinds of information regarding the residents on there. I can't speak about the previous owners and their behaviors. I do know that some of the units that have been there were rented out by the trailer owners, because you have the landowners and then the trailers are owned by the residents. The trailers are not owned by the landowners, and the individuals who own those trailers were leasing those out, and which I agree is wrong. Okay, so I mean, we try to disparage. I can't say everything the Ritz have done is above hand, but also there's been some residents there who have moved out and allowed other people and rented out or sold their trailers, and you end up with individuals that are just surprised. So I'm not saying that's any kind of defense. It just creates a new layer of an issue where you have new people that moved in there, spent money, and now surprise, okay? Because they were inadequately informed. So when the task force first started looking at this, the first thing was, what is the extent of the problem? Because there's been conflicting information regarding daylighting. Because I have invoices from Ford showing that work had been done. The new systems installed in 2016. They came out in 2018, did repairs. And so one of the things we said is, are we just dealing with a water issue? Is there a water and sewer issue? So we had Northern Utilities go out, and although there was reports of daylighting, you have the cursory report that said, hey, there's no evidence of that. So now we were working with we were working with Forge Engineering, since they installed the system, and trying to say, hey, can you scope it? Because if we just have existing trailers that have a functioning septic system, they just don't have water, then that's a completely different than no water and no sewer. So let's make sure the information we have is supported by third-party independent reports. And that's working with Forge to try to scope those systems and see, because then it's just shipping in water. Because I would agree that if you didn't have water and you don't have sewer, you might as well be living in a shed. Can we agree? So one is the task force set out to say, what is the actual situations out there regarding the septic system? Because we hear that there's daylighting, but the residents are saying, no, there's not. And there's been repairs since, and I have some information. So, but has more damage happened since? Okay, since these repairs that were done in 2018, I want to say early 2020. Forgive me, don't quote me on that. I can go back through the invoices. So let's just make sure that we're dealing with the actual situation. The other thing that's also happened during these last 90 days is that the owners have got together and hired a property through the rural, I believe it's a sponsored program through rural community development, which is an ROC, a resident-owned community. And they've began having conversations with the bank, with the lien holders, to say, can we form almost like a condo association? Can we buy it from you? And they allowed to do what's called to do utility improvements. So they can roll into the loan utility improvements. Now, bringing in well and septic, bringing in water and sewer is completely going to blow that out of proportion. But is it possible to set up either one or two wells that service 24 people or meet that DEC standard? And what is a water distribution system? And the bids we had that were more like $1.5 million. Okay. So, given that it's 10 acres of land here, and if I guess I don't want to go into the long detail, but they're currently having conversations to form a resident-owned community that has grant programs that allow them, they help them form it for no charge. The individuals can come in and buy it. They're shareholders. There's no equity. No one gets a piece of equity. But the whole purpose is a program specifically designed for situations like this. And more importantly, this process of them taking over the property would not financially benefit the previous owners at all. They're not looking to it's not like because they're selling it. They're basically what's almost be like a deed in lieu, or, would you call it a short sale where the residents would negotiate with the bank for amount less than the amount of due owed so that they could roll in the utility improvements or whatever needs to be done, because the bank doesn't want to take this property back. The liability involved in that, they're much better selling it at a discount and allowing someone to roll into a long-term financing the repairs. So we've been working in maybe a completely different direction, because you've got a completely different set of individuals that the DEC has previously been dealing with. Right, which is, I agree, the landowners were the previous owners, or the current owners still were completely disconnected in trying to make this done. And so over the last 90 days, that's been our effort, which is why we're having these community task force. At the same time, I will tell you, I have not told these people just to hang out. Every one of these meetings, you can go on back on record, and I've told them, guys, you are wishing in one hand, spit in the other, but you better be looking at an emergency place to go. There is no guarantee that after 90 days you're getting an extension. And I would highly encourage you to start seeking other routes as much as possible. And I have told them that at every meeting. In fact, sometimes I'm the guy on the wet blanket on the party going, hey, have you made any efforts? Have you talked to NeighborWorks? How many more people are out there, and where are you going to go? Because all this effort is still a gamble. So the other thing I want to make sure is that I'm on record letting you know I've told them this is no guarantee. We can try as hard as we can, but ultimately, if it's determined that there's no reasonable, safe outcome, they're going to have to go somewhere. And where will that be? So thank you. They may, yeah, if they have just so.
Yeah, we only have 15 minutes left in this conversation. There are other folks who want to talk. So please, let's keep our responses brief.
I'll be very quick. I just want to clarify the ownership situation is complex and it is changing. Currently, the property is titled to the Ritzes. There is a credit union with a mortgage on the property. They have a foreclosure. They just haven't finalized and perfected the judgment. The co-op has been formed by the residents that is hoping to take over ownership, but it's multiple hands in the pot.
And I'll be quick as well, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Assemblyman Cross. A couple of things. First, there is now less water there, so there is currently not seen daylighting because they don't have access to a hookup. So that is decreasing the amount. But my environmental crimes unit, as well as my teams, did do inspections over the last 3 years and did find daylighting sewage at those times. So I can share those results with you. Also, I've had to give up my pride on this one. I actually, my goal is providing safe drinking water and sewage for these people. If it ultimately leads to an increase in property value because we get them hooked up, that I have to let that go. So that I love the fact that you've been trying to work with them and trying to find a solution. My biggest concern is that $1.5 million or so initial setup for the tanks, et cetera, that's there. That could potentially be rolled into the mortgage. The problem is that ongoing OPEX, the operating cost, I've been told is roughly $1,000 per home. And that's where I'm concerned that the bringing in that water on an ongoing basis could make it cost prohibitive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Brawley. Oh, also want to note for the record, we've been joined by Mr. Volan. Go ahead, Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, thank you. I think a couple of my questions have been answered, but just to confirm, so the units on the property, the mobile homes, are owned by the residents and not the park owner. Is that correct?
I believe it's a mixed. No, it's owned by the residents.
Yeah,
per Mr.
Yeah,
person.
my understanding is that they are all owned by the residents. The Ritz just owned the land and provided the sewer, and the responsibility was water and sewer. And then individuals would purchase their trailers and move them on site.
All right, thank you. Yeah, and I know hauled water is a common method in others. I know the city of Bethel, for example, 4 out of 5 residents are on hauled water, but I also know it's very expensive. So I think that is something that sounds like a better short-term than long-term solution for that park. But I guess the other question is maybe, are there other folks in this room, and I'll look to the chair as well. I understand there may be some residents here who may want to speak, so I just want to make sure that we make some time for them when that's appropriate.
Yeah, thanks. We'll do our best. We're quickly coming to the end of the time for this conversation. I want to note for the record that at 11:15 we were joined by Mr. Myers on the phone. Ms. Branga?
So I think, Mr. Bruni, what you described is pretty appalling, that these landlords were profiting with this park. And I just wanted to throw out here, we had a meeting with the mobile manufactured home builders, and Matt Carey told us that he has 100 spaces in Glen Caron trailer park. And he said most of the mobile home manufactured homes in Anchorage have available spots. No one has reached out to them. So if they have been recently moving homes into this place, that says to me that those homes are movable, and that maybe it would be a better situation to put them in a park that has space.
Thanks. So I'm next in the queue. So I guess I just have a couple questions about some of the statements made in the conclusion section, particularly as it references the assembly. So this is on pages 4 and 5. So it talks about, quote, take or at least for the assembly to take or at least allow decisive action to remedy this longstanding public health hazard. And then another quote, we encourage the assembly to act on the findings. I guess specific to those calls on the assembly, could Law please speak to what the intent behind those statements are? Is the municipality going to be bringing something forward for the assembly to consider regarding condemnation?
So regarding condemnation, there's the recent assembly resolution which put a pause for 90 days, which will expire at the end of the month. So if the assembly would like some kind of proposal, we'd be happy to help draft that. I was trying not to, I believe the effort was to not put words in the assembly's mouth, but be more than happy to assist in whatever solution or proposal the body wanted. You could just allow the 90 days to expire, and then the notice to vacate and the regular building board and building code process could continue. Alternatively, the assembly could put forward a resolution or a memorandum of some kind describing what the body's opinion is on this particular topic.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm unaware if any of those resolutions are being authored or considered for us for the July 25th meeting. I guess that'd be the last regular meeting before the end of the month. But otherwise, there's nothing the administration is planning on bringing forward to us. This is just time lapses. Then what happens. Okay, got it. Thanks for clarifying that, because the statements here made it sound like the assembly needed to act, and that doesn't sound like that's accurate.
Well, and with one clarification, Mario can correct me if I say this wrong, but it's my understanding that the administration is happy to work with the assembly on this. We want everybody working together. So we'll definitely coordinate before something happens.
Thanks. Go ahead, Mr. Cross.
I just want to respond to Karen's comment. So of the, I think originally it was 48 units, but we're down to roughly 25 occupied units on there. A large majority were there in the 60s, and they're not movable. There's, I believe, only 3 units left there that were like camper trailers that were brought in afterwards. And so those are more like your Forest Rivers or whatever it is that have more like a travel trailer as opposed to mobile homes. But one of the difficulties you have is so many of those are so dilapidated. And I'm sure this is going to happen in other trailer parks that have these issues, is they're just simply at the end of their life expectancy. And so it's not like they can just move them to another trailer park. These have been deemed that, they've been sitting there for so long, you try to move it, it's just going to collapse, which is a whole nother issue. So, but to answer your question, it isn't like they've been moving new trailers in. The only ones that have moved in are either occupying existing units that can't be moved, or there's a small, I think it was 3 trailers that had moved in since. So thank you.
All right. Any other? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. President.
Just want to be really clear on action. It says in here that that this property should be condemned. does that require any action from the assembly? Does the assembly need to be involved in that at all? And is it the intention of the administration to condemn this property? Because that it looks as though in the conclusion of this, that is the preferred conclusion.
And then just to be clear, that is condemn as in this is a building which cannot be used for this purpose, not condemn as in a municipality takes ownership of the property. It's a standard building board process. The assembly does not have to take action because it is just, we're not changing title, we're not changing ownership, we're simply saying you cannot use for this purpose. So that's what condemn means in that context. But no, the assembly does not necessarily have to take action, but the assembly has taken action previously. So we want to work together and make sure everybody's on the same page.
And is it the intention of the administration to move forward in that way?
Barring additional input from the assembly to the contrary, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other? Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that the building or the location manager has actually barred NeighborWorks from going on to the property. This is an organization that wants to help. And so I think I think your recommendation is fantastic. And obviously your point is well said that some of these are old trailers and could not be moved, but there are spots that are available. I love that concept. NeighborWorks wants to work with these people. That said, the assembly is kind of sending mixed messages. Perception is reality. And when the public and the residents of this location think that we're having a study or that we've put this on hold or the judge has delayed it, they're going to think that there's hope that they can remain for 3 months more, 6 months more, 12 months more. Your point is so well said. Thank you for saying that about that. You should be looking for alternative locations. Well, as long as this perception of delay and engagement by the assembly is there and by the courts, action won't be taken. So I think a strong message from the assembly that we support this action of the administration, of what DEC is trying to do and has been trying to do to support these least fortunate people, would be a strong message coming from the assembly as well. Thank you. And thanks again for the time and the opportunity today, Mr. Chair.
Thanks. I'll leave it up to my colleagues on whether they want to bring forth such a statement at our July 25th meeting. Okay, not hearing anyone else, then yeah, who do we have? So Ms. Brawley stated that there was some residents who might be interested in speaking. So I'll go ahead and invite someone to come up and please introduce yourself into the mic.
I am not a resident. I'm a member of the task force. I'm with AFAC.
And can you just please
Yes.
speak into the mic? Thanks.
I am not a resident. My name's Angela Liston. I'm on the task force. I'm with Anchorage Faith and Action Congregations Together. AFAC, we've been working with the residents. There's one resident present, but she has asked that I speak. Unfortunately, the residents aren't here because this was not on the agenda 24 hours ago. So we were sort of blindsided that this was going to come today. I feel like I've heard a lot of misinformation today. I have been working with the park since March, early March, and an amazing amount of work has been done. And people have been incredibly active in cleaning up. The 40 tons of trash have been moved out of that park. I mean, they've really taken ownership of the place. Rock Northwest, that's their reason to be, is to help mobile home parks convert to property, resident owned. And they're helping us. They're actually working with the credit union and the owners right now to get a contract for sale. Karma Reed at HUD has been incredibly helpful, and there's certainly lines of income to fix this water system. There are some discrepancies here in that it was stated that they were using a well on the property instead of the well across the street, and the well on the property wasn't safe. It was DEC that told the church that they could not let the park use their water. So they're not using that well because DEC told them they couldn't. And now DEC is saying, oh, well, they're using the wrong well. At least that's what it appears from this letter, which I've had it's very briefly. I've just glanced at it. I have to say I haven't had time to carefully read the letter. But I would ask that the task force be given more time. I mean, clearly, we're just getting up to speed right now. And I think Assemblyman Cross would attest to that a lot has happened in the last month. So I would prefer that the assembly say, take 2 more months. Let's go till, granted that takes us into winter, and if there's a crisis, it would be a problem. But there's active work happening right now, and a utility is helping us figure out this water system. And the estimate is $200,000 to get a water system up for a year that would be workable for a year, and then next summer come in and put in the 1.5 million system. And I believe there's HUD money that could be available for that. And we have not banned NeighborWorks. They've known for several weeks now that they can come into the park when they want. So that's no longer the case.
Great, thank you. And I'm actually wondering just a couple things, please. One, could you just say your name again? Into the
Angela
record?
Liston.
Great, thank you. And then thank you for that request of 2 more months. I guess, again, to my colleagues, that'll be something that some of the members going to have to bring forward, I assume, if they want to assertively state 2 more months before condemnation, then that's something the assembly, I assume, will have to pass on July 25th. And then I guess a third thing is, can you just, for the record, state who the members of the task force are, the organizations involved?
Oh, gee. Karma Reed from HUD, Kevin Cross from the Assembly. Assemblyman Cross, you may have to help me here. I'm from AFACT.
John Weddleton.
John Weddleton, NeighborWorks. 2 members, Coalition on Homelessness. 2 people from the park. Oh, and Department of Regional Affairs, Anita Baker from community, from the state. So federal, state, muni. We have asked repeatedly for DEC and Public Works to be part of that, the municipal public works. We've been asking them since the very beginning of the task force, and repeatedly since then, to please be present so we can all hear everything together, and they have declined that offer. So
Thank you. All right, I think we're gonna have to end this conversation and look forward to seeing what is brought forward, if anything, on our July 25th meeting for consideration. We're gonna go ahead and move on then to our next topic. So going back on our agenda, we're going to go back to the 2023-2024 Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan. All right. So as a reminder, and I'm going to ask if there's other conversations happening to please take them outside the room. We're going to keep moving on in here. So as a reminder, we started working through this plan, the Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan, last month. And at that point, I set a goal for us to have some type of direction and alignment by the August committee meeting. If by August, we don't have any sense of what the Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan will look like, then I think that's an appropriate time for us to start really stressing out. But until then, I think it's important to recognize that the work is ongoing, and that I think August is an appropriate time for us to really be able to settle on a plan. Last month, we really broke down the conversation into 3 parts: the planning numbers, the financial numbers, and the budget. We're not going to be able to talk about budget just yet. I had to unfortunately cancel the work session that was planned last Friday at the request of OMB, as they asked for an additional 2 weeks to finalize their memo that's going to help guide our discussion on budget for all kinds of things. Not just the Emergency Cold Weather Shelter Plan, but for permanent year-round low barrier shelter, the pilot allowed sites, and whatever else. So we're going to be saving the budget discussion for the August committee meeting, but I'm hoping that today we're going to be able to tackle some of the other areas. So let's go ahead and start with planning numbers. So does the coalition have any update on planning numbers? I think during my presentation last month, the planning number I suggested we use was 450 individuals. Can you go ahead and pull up that slide from that presentation? It's slide 5. So I guess to the coalition, and last month it was Miss Parks, but I don't know if Miss Ware wants to come up, or maybe I think Miss Parks might be on the phone if she wants to speak on the phone. Whoever. Okay, whoever wants to. So, Ms. Parks, if you're on the phone, I believe it's *6 to unmute yourself.
Hi, this is Jessica Parks with the Anchorage Coalition on Homelessness, yes, that 450 number seems to hold fairly accurate, of course, accounting for state program as well.
Great. And then, in your opinion, does that 450 number account for, and apologies, maybe you said this and I just didn't hear you on the phone. Does that 450 number account for, so I know we're going to be having some outflow, but does that 450 number account for any inflow? And I guess the reason that I'm asking that question is that last year we had a planning number of 300, if I remember correctly, and we were unfortunately low on that number. 300 was a planning number, but the real number ended up being around 500. So now our planning number is 450. I just want to make sure that we are not lowballing that number. So if you can just talk about inflow and if you think that 450 number will correctly account for outflow and inflow. And then before you respond to Ms. Honest, the presentation, it was given at a, no, not that one. So if you can just go back to the website. And if you can just scroll down, it was, just keep going scrolling down. I'll let you know. Okay, stop. June 8th. Yeah, thanks. It's the June 8th presentation. Bingo. Slide 5. Thanks. Go ahead, Ms. Parks.
Yes, that number would not be accounting for inflow and outflow on the system as well. I know that there are multiple projects that we are hoping come online to provide housing in the next few months. So I think that we could get a more accurate number as we move forward in the next few months.
Thanks. So what I will do is I will go ahead and continue using the 450 planning number, and then I will encourage the coalition, if you think that we need to revise our planning number, to please let the health department, the administration, the assembly know that we should be revising our planning number. Does that sound fair to the coalition?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Any questions on the planning number before we move on? All right, then let's go ahead and move on to the financials. So last month, and this is slide 6, please. So last month, I just put up some preliminary numbers on what some of these different levers might cost, per person per day estimate. Just looking at what we appropriated, not necessarily spent, but appropriated for the 22-23 winter season. Does the health department have any update on the costs for these, so that we can get a sense of whether these are accurate, either are too high, too low?
Kimberly Rash, Anchorage Health Department. We don't have those numbers right now.
Okay.
Our apologies.
No problem. So is that something that perhaps the health department could come to us in August, and just let us know, again, for planning purposes, as we're looking at collaboratively putting together the emergency cold weather shelter plan, if these numbers are accurate in August?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, so then let's go ahead and move. I guess any questions from the committee on the financials piece? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. President.
Just want to make sure I understand where these numbers came from. Can you just say that again?
Yeah, so these numbers come from what the assembly appropriated. So not necessarily spent, but we appropriated $2 million for Henning to operate the Sullivan. Did the Henning spend $2 million? Not necessarily, right? So that's what these numbers come from. Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, thank you. This isn't a question, but just a little bit more information. So before Treasurer Dan Moore retired in June, I had a meeting with him and the new Treasurer Glenn Cipriano, and we discussed just hypothetically, are those numbers in terms of non-congregate shelter realistic? And is there any significant forfeiture of bed tax, for example? Because what we're talking about there is renting hotel rooms, and those would be in the more kind of affordable range of hotel rooms, so not the Captain Cook. And looking at, the fact that we have relatively fewer visitors in the winter than we do in the summer. And so again, we didn't look at specific hotels or make a recommendation, but they, based on what we saw in terms of their typical rates, 110 per person per day seemed reasonable. Certainly could be higher. It's possible to negotiate a contract over several months and a guaranteed block of rooms that may, bring that lower. And that would, of course, be the health department's role and not the assembly's. And then we also believe that there was not bed tax being paid on those. And of course, now, especially in hotels that are de facto low-income housing, but folks who do rent for more than 30 days at a time are not paying bed tax. So what we found, basically, there may be some nominal forfeiture of bed tax if we did that, but we're not talking about the ones that make the city most of its revenue, which are going to be those higher end hotels. So anyway, all of that to say, we did confirm at least that it does seem feasible. It will, of course, depend on which properties are available, but that is in line with what was done last year. And again, just making sure we weren't forfeiting a large amount of revenue, which based on our exercise, it looked like we would not be. Thanks.
Just one, and I realize we're going to wait until August until we dig into this, but has the health department at least initiated any communication with potential hotels that may be of a possibility?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you okay? Good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a good segue into the conversation that we're about to get into in a few different categories, not just hotels. So anyone else before we get into the levers? Great. And again, so we're going to get into this conversation about levers, understanding that maybe we don't have a lot of information, but hopefully the health department will understand the type of information that we're hoping to have in August. So let's move on to assessing what levers are realistically available. Let's start with non-congregate. So last year we had a few different hotels that we used for cold weather shelter. Has the administration actively heard from anyone who is interested in providing that service again this upcoming winter?
Tamaya Liebersbach, Anchorage Health Department. So initially, towards the start of the summer, we had put out a request for information around anyone who would be willing to offer non-congregate shelter. We received no responses for that request for information. What the department is planning to do at this time is to refine that and put out 2 separate requests for information. One that would be for non-congregate just providing the shelter, and one that would be for someone providing provider support at a non-congregate shelter. So kind of splitting those 2 services versus asking, for example, a hotel to also provide meals, case management, those kinds of things. So we're hopeful that if we put that out, we may get different responses. But I will say that initially we did not receive any responses when we put out the request for information looking for interested vendors.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not surprised that we didn't get any responses to that RFI, because as I remember it, and I was one of the folks who helped provide information into that was really for folks who are maybe interested in providing non-congregate for the summer. So I'm not surprised we didn't get any responses. But hopefully, if we put out something and we actively reach out to folks like the folks who we worked with last year who provided that service, like the Alex Hotel. If those same levels of rooms are available again for this upcoming winter, that'd be helpful. So looking forward to the results of that RFI. Do you think that we'll get results from that RFI by the August meeting?
So to my Liebersbach again, I would say that we could, but sometimes if we put an RFI out for a very short period of time, we're less likely to get results. So to get it for the August meeting, we'd probably look at just only putting it out for 2 weeks. We may want to put it out for a bit longer, but we could initially try. And I will say, sorry, I do have some information on the financials. For non-congregate, we were right around that $110 per person per day. It varied a little bit between the Alex Hotel and the Aviator Hotel, but we were right on target on that. And I'm waiting for my staff to send the mass shelter numbers, but I do believe that the actual costs were significantly lower than what's there.
Got it. Yeah, thanks. I remember that. We appropriated much more than was actually spent for mass shelter. Thanks. Okay, so then let's see. All right, so you're going to put out an RFI. We may get some requests from that RFI that we can share at our August meeting, but likely it might be beyond that where we get some additional requests. I guess the question I have is around the hotels. Like, are they actively looking at the RFIs that we put out? I guess my real question is, like, if we just put out an RFI, is that going to be enough, or will we need to be reaching out to the hotels and having individual conversations with the hotels?
So I can tell you that when we put out an RFI, what our department does is we reach out individually to as many different providers as we can to let them know that the RFI is posted and to encourage them to respond to it. When we have an RFI on the street, we can't necessarily have further conversations at that point, but we do reach out specifically to them. I will say, the health department has dealt with non-congregate sheltering for unhoused individuals for quite some time around clients with active TB cases, and it has been very challenging, and it does usually require some in-depth conversations with providers. It's hard to get someone to just agree to it through an RFI or even an ITB because of the concerns that need to be addressed.
Got it. Thanks. Any other questions specific to non-congregate before we move on? All right. So just so you all know, the way I'm hoping to have this conversation per each of the levers is existing shelter capacity, churches, temporary shelter, and then any other options folks want to mention. So moving on to existing shelter capacity. So existing shelters have previously helped and stepped up to expand capacity to help out with the winter. Have we heard from any of our existing shelter network that might be interested in doing that again? For example, would Covenant House be interested in doing, I think there was 25 transitional age youth, running that program again for the winter as part of the emergency shelter program? And has anyone reached out to Brother Francis to see if they might, and that's a tough conversation with them, I understand that, but see if they might be interested in a small bump in their numbers during the winter?
I'm not aware that we've had any. Apologies. Yes, we have reached out to them. I believe that we're still waiting to hear back, but we can certainly try to make sure we have answers and information for the August 25th meeting, or excuse me, the August meeting.
Great. Just to confirm, when you say them, is that both those organizations?
Just a second. I'm getting a response. Apologies.
No problem.
Yes, both organizations.
Wonderful. I guess, and perhaps maybe this is Ms. Parks, you could help respond to this question. Are there, besides Covenant House and Brother Francis Shelter, do you think there are any other organizations in our existing shelter network that we can ask to see if they might be able to expand capacity?
Thank you. This is Jessica with PH. I believe that there are other shelter options in the city that you could reach out to. Those, of course, would be higher barrier shelters and not low barrier shelters. And then I believe that talking to shelter providers for families and the structure that was used last year with the family emergency cold weather shelter could be options for the family shelter need as well.
Thanks. I guess as the health department does this work to reach out to specific shelters, would the coalition be able to provide their advice or guidance to the health department so that we can, in August, hopefully have a full picture of the existing shelter network and who in the existing shelter network would be interested in increasing capacity and accepting and understanding municipal funds and the ties that are required by using municipal funds?
Yes, ACH would be happy to coordinate with the health department and talk through those providers and the options that might be available.
Great, thanks. All right, anything else on the existing shelter capacity? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to speak to the family sheltering that Ms. Parks mentioned. So the health department does currently have a grant with Christian Health Associates where they are coordinating the family cold weather sheltering. And that service is funded for this calendar year through December at this time already.
Yeah, thanks so much. I guess going back to Ms. Parks, if you could just clarify why you specifically brought up family shelters in this conversation, understanding that Christian Health Associates does have that particular contract or grant.
Yes, bringing it up because it does have a contract. So if you're talking about existing shelter providers, recognizing that there is a contract for the family emergency cold weather shelter in existence.
Got it. Okay, thank you. All right. Then, not seeing any other discussion on existing shelter capacity, let's go ahead and move on to one of our favorites to keep talking about, which is churches. So I know we talk a lot about churches and wanting to leverage that relationship more to help out with the winter. And I know there are actually some organizations that work with the church network that are interested in having this conversation. Has the administration engaged in that conversation with any of the entities in the church network, and how has that conversation been going?
So the church network historically has been coordinated by Christian Health Associates for the family emergency cold weather sheltering. And the way that this operated last year, and my understanding, the way that they would like to operate it this year, is that the church volunteers are actually the ones working with Christian Health Associates at the location that we are funding through our current grant with Christian Health Associates. So instead of the churches, as historically has happened, kind of rotating which night they offer services at their location, those volunteers are going to one location so families don't have to move around the city to a different church night to night. So in that sense, the capacity at the churches is already being used as part of our system, just in a different way, with that funding through Christian Health Associates for the family cold weather sheltering.
Thanks. I guess just to expand, and I really do appreciate all the work that the church network does for families. I guess, one of the things that I have heard several of my colleagues say over the years, so prior colleagues, some current colleagues, is that they wish that churches in particular helped out more with single adults. So has there been any interest or conversation with the churches in stepping into that unknown territory?
I'm not sure that there's been conversation around that, but part of the reason that churches mainly serve families is because of how code is written, and under 16-125 and 16-120. And so there is a possibility that if they were to shift more towards single adults, that we would have to look at a code change. The other issue with churches is that not all of them have sprinkler systems. And so year to year, it can change which churches are allowed by the fire marshal to have people sleep in them. And so that is one of the reasons that, again, the churches went more towards having their volunteers support a single site rather than having individuals actually stay in their church locations.
Got it. Thanks for that explanation. Okay, any other discussion folks want to have on churches? Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can I ask you, is it, when you say a single site, is it like a single church, or it's just like a different location?
Yeah. So the site that Christian Health Associates is operating is, I believe it was assisted living home previously, but it's basically a residential site that they're renting and that they can have multiple families housed in at one time. And then the churches are assisting with their volunteers providing things at that site for families.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. All right. Any other discussion on churches before I move on? All right. You looked like you wanted to. All right. Not seeing anyone else. Not seeing anyone else. Then we're going to go ahead and move on to temporary shelter. Temporary shelter options that aren't the Sullivan Arena. So for my part, this is the last resort option. It'd be great if most of our need could be met through non-congregate options and through existing shelter capacity. And but I think it's also I think we would be remiss if we don't at least start thinking about the temporary shelter options that aren't the Sullivan Arena. I'm going to keep saying that. So has the administration considered possible locations for shelter options that would be smaller locations? We're talking about 100, 150 people max for shelter options that are not the Sullivan Arena.
To my knowledge, at this time, we've been primarily focusing on non-congregate options because our understanding is that that's what's most supported by the Assembly and also by the Coalition to End Homelessness.
Great. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Rowland.
Thank you. So yeah, it's interesting. We recently, I went to a Fairview Community Council, and it members from the administration who were there to present on homelessness at the invite of the council seemed to intimate that the Sullivan is not going to be considered for emergency cold weather shelter. And then I've been talking with some folks in the hockey community, and it seems like potentially the Wolverines are trying to get a contract to be able to play at the Sullivan. So what is going on with that? Because I'm hearing whispers that even the administration is not posturing to use the Sullivan for emergency winter shelter.
Chief of Staff, through the chair to Mr. Voland. I can't comment directly, except that I think we can definitely say that we have heard the pleas of the Fairview community, and I think the administration is doing everything it can to seek all the options that are on the table that you've heard from the health department. But as to the specifics, I can't comment on that right now.
Can I follow up? So are there talks with the Wolverines to be able to play at the Sullivan Arena in the near future?
Through the chair, I can't comment on that right now, but I'll chase down some information for you and chat with you offline.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. All right. So I think for my part, even if it's just something that's in your back pocket and you never have to use, I think it would be helpful to at least for the administration to consider what it might look like to stand up a temporary shelter that is not the Sullivan Arena. Again, I hope that we don't have to use it, but I think it would be helpful, even if it's in your back pocket and you never had to take it out of there. Go ahead, Ms. Sproling.
Sorry, I thought of another question. I'm remembering a few years ago, there was a focus also on warming centers. So granted, that's not shelter, but especially if there are time-limited shelters, because I know historically the church system, you had to leave by a certain time. And I know that there's just a need for, when the weather drops really cold. I know in the winter, starting in 2021, there was an initial warming tent that was basically a tent without a floor, and it really didn't meet those needs. And I know the Sullivan has also been used for that. I know also people mover buses have been used for that purpose. And I'm not suggesting any of those are great. Certainly we would want to see shelter, but I just wonder what's the discussion about warming centers, especially given that when the temperature drops below a certain point, I think the police are required to take folks in. And I know the safety center is one place to do that, but that's only if you're intoxicated. So just wondering how that's part of the conversation as well.
Thank you for the question, Kimberly Rash. I think that that is definitely something that we need to consider. I do know that the Anchorage Safety Center was used in the past in those specific months. So we are going to need to consider those types of locations as well.
Great, thanks. I guess I'm going to go back to shelter because I assume that's what Mr. Martinez wants to go to, and then definitely want to come back to warming. So go ahead, Mr. Martinez.
Yeah, I was going to do a gambit here and hit a few different points. I was going to raise the warming shelters with respect to last year's Sullivan operation, and just what we heard was that a lot of the community challenges in the vicinity were more related to the warming area and the lack of support there versus folks who were actually clients at the Sullivan. So I just wanted to highlight that the warming center was part of the challenge of public safety as well, let alone just the humane response for the city. With the shelters, I'm really interested in a longitudinal understanding of the way we did things. And there was some degree of mentioning past practices, but I'm really interested in sheer numbers. And when we talk about the civil society networks or the church networks, I'm really interested in what those numbers were in 17, 18, 19, 20, of what sort of help were they involved with? What needs were being met outside of our own municipal capacity? Because my urgency, I would just urge, is start organizing and quickly. These are not Ivy Tower signals that are going to call activation. These are really heart conversations, really leadership conversations to make sure that networks that we have available in our community of civil society can be activated, can have a clear picture and a focus. But on that front, I just wanted to highlight that I had a question about the numbers as well. If I can go back to the number question, this has to do with all the sheltering options. What actually is $92 per person per day, $110 per person per day for? What is the outcome of those expenditures? Is it just the shelter itself? Is it also with food or any additional services? What do we expect for those things?
Thank you for the question. So when we're looking at our costs last year, what those include in a non-congregate setting, for example, $110 a day, that's a private room that might have 1 or 2 people in it, food, 2 or 3 meals a day, and snacks, security and support staff. You're also talking about damages to rooms, a lot of replacement of furniture, fixtures, mattresses, sheets, towels, those kinds of things, laundry services, as well as case management and other navigation services. So it's really the housing, the food, and wraparound support services for individuals. That's what we're looking at in those costs. So it's not just shelter. And one of the things that we're looking at is whether we should separate and have a provider that's just providing the shelter and a separate provider that's providing all the support services. We kind of had 2 models last year in how that worked. So, but it includes all of those wraparound services.
Just to follow up, so just for clarity, the initial intentionality was to have the location where people are also potentially being the provider of some of the services, and now it's going to be bifurcated into 2 different lanes of work or contracts?
I think that that's something that the assembly indicated they'd be interested in us looking at. One, with the non-congregate sites that we had this past year, we had one where we contracted solely with the sheltering provider, and then they subcontracted all of those other services. And so we didn't have as much control necessarily on those subcontracts and who was providing the support services or exactly what was provided. The other option, which we had at one of our other locations, was basically rent a block of rooms and then contract with a provider to come in and provide the support services, the staffing, the food, and those kinds of things. That gives us a little bit more direct control over those services and direct oversight. So there's kind of two different methodologies. And with non-congregate sites, a hotel, for example, vendor may not want to be responsible for having to subcontract food, case management, all of those things. And so it might be easier for us to get a hotel vendor to agree to non-congregate sheltering if we directly contract all of the other services ourselves rather than require that of them.
Just one additional question, if I can. How many people died last year who were sheltered? I heard that we had a very high number of deaths on the street of people who were unsheltered, astronomically high, as we all know. But were there similar numbers or any numbers? I hope the answer is none, and that sheltering saves lives is where I'm hoping to get to. But did we have any deaths of sheltered folks?
We don't have that information. There were some individuals that were saved with Narcan, but we don't have an actual number of individuals that may have passed away in shelter.
But presumably none to exposure.
Correct.
Thanks. So I just want to try and manage the rest of our time that we have left. So can I just get a show of hands, folks in the audience who wanted to speak during audience participation? All right. So I see 1, 2, 3, 4. That's like the rest of our time. All right. So we're going to have to extend time by a little bit, probably about 12 minutes to accommodate all of that. So what I want to do for the rest of our time, talk a little bit about the Golden Lion. There's a work session. I'll talk about that work session. I'm glad that that was requested, even though I didn't ask for it. And then we'll go to final audience participation. So I guess just wrapping up this conversation, moving on to warming. So does the administration have, and maybe you said this and I just didn't hear it, ideas in terms of where warming might take place? Are you in development of that plan of what warming might look like?
So I'm not sure that we have specific plans about where warming will take place. I can tell you that one thing we have internally discussed quite a bit is not having warming take place at the same location as sheltering. I think that's important to manage the population sizes you have in one space.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a lesson learned for sure. Okay, then I guess last question I have to wrap up this conversation, and then I'll see if anyone else wants to chime in. Are there any other options that we haven't talked about so far that the administration is considering for this upcoming winter?
No, I don't think so.
Great. Good to know that we're all on the same page. There won't be any surprises. All right. Any questions from my colleagues before I wrap up this conversation? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Bradley.
Yeah, I think just building on that point, I'll share. I've gotten some questions about proposals that have been raised in the past, such as the recreation centers and specifically, I think for example, Dempsey Ice Arena. And I'm not suggesting those. I'm asking because other people are concerned about that. So I just want to ask explicitly, are those being considered at this time as shelter or warming?
I can tell you that at this time, we are not considering those. One reason those come up as options is because they are municipal owned buildings. And so when we're in a pinch or if we don't have funding to run a facility, those are some of the facilities that come up as options.
Great, thanks. All right, so then just to wrap up this conversation, so in August, we are going to be having a conversation starting with the planning number of 450 individuals. We're going to fine tune some of the financials per lever, which you all saw on that slide. Sounds like some of them are correct and some of them will need to be adjusted. Then hopefully by the August meeting, which is on August 16th, we will have some sense of what the realistic options are available. So hopefully by then, maybe we'll have heard from a hotel or two. We'll have some idea of existing shelter capacity and whether existing shelters might be expanding their capacity. So have a sense of all of those different levers, so that come August we can in this committee formulate a plan collectively with the health department. And if the health department wants to actually present a plan after you do all of that work, that would be great. Then so that'll be August, and I'm sure that's going to take a lot of our time in August, specifically going to the Golden Lion. So on Friday, there is a work session, and I apologize we didn't get to it today. I didn't imagine that DEC conversation taking so long. The Golden Lion, we have a work session scheduled for Friday, July 21 at 2 p.m. in this room. So I'm going to ask folks to come here again for us to have that conversation to talk about the lease and the startup costs, which is going to be before the assembly on the 25th. So apologies we didn't get to that today as planned. We will talk about that on Friday. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and I'm going to ask for an extension of the meeting for another, I think 10 minutes should be more than enough.
So moved.
Okay, moved and seconded. Is there any opposition? All right, seeing no opposition, then we're going to go ahead and move on to final audience participation. So if folks, I saw that there were 4 hands raised. So if folks want to come up one at a time, if you want to come up to this chair, make sure that the mic is on. So green light, introduce yourself, and then you'll have 3 minutes and I'll manage that.
Hi, my name is Dan Gibney. I sit on the Forest Park Task Force representing Join, formerly known as AFACT, and I am furious. And the reason I'm furious is because the presentation that was given today is one of the first bits of communication that the residents of Forest Park have had with DEC for the past several months. There have been multiple attempts to invite them to sit in on our task force meetings. Again, this task force that was put together by residents of Forest Park, they have denied all of those requests. The only communication that we've received is a letter to the residents about a month ago, which included none of this information. And if we had received this information before 10 minutes before this meeting started, we could have shared that all of the concerns about ownership, about the property, about funding are issues that the task force are currently working on and are on the verge of coming to a solution. So I just think it needs to be clear that what this letter is suggesting, what the DEC and the mayor's office is suggesting, is taking 100 low-income people and adding them to the streets during an unprecedented housing crisis, an unprecedented homelessness situation. There are other bits of misinformation in this document that I'd be happy to provide further clarity on, but just 2 quick things. The Forest Park Optional Relocation Program that NeighborWorks has been administering, the eligibility for that ends October 2020. So the vacate notice went out May 2022, a full year and a half after the eligibility for the program ends. So there's a big gap there. Additionally, it was stated during the presentation that there was a vacate or a trespass notice that was ordered against NeighborWorks. That notice was issued by a former park manager who has nothing to do with the property. At this time, has not had anything to do with the property for about a year, and was rescinded. NeighborWorks has in writing that they're allowed to go on the property. So I'm flabbergasted. Again, when Assemblymember Cross said that we're happy, this is the sort of first bit of communication that we've received. What we're talking about is communication to the people who would be directly affected by a vacate notice order going to effect. Again, 100 people added to the streets during an unprecedented homelessness crisis. So I really urge the assembly to take up the suggestion that Angela Liston gave earlier to give an additional 2 months, stay on the vacate notice, allow the task force to conclude its work. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on up. Welcome.
Thank you. My name is David Cronick. I'm with Northern Utility Services. We provide community water system operation, maintenance, and management to communities around South Central Alaska. And I wanted to comment today because for 20 years, I have been involved in the operation and maintenance of community water systems in trailer courts. Most of all the trailer courts in Anchorage are operated by our firm. It is much less expensive to have a community water system well regulated by DEC than to buy city water. So they have to maintain distribution systems and the well to DEC standards. We've also been involved a little bit in the wastewater side. My big comment is I see a huge opportunity here with Forest Park that maybe is not seen by this organization. In that, the opportunity to be able to have a model for community ownership of a trailer court is kind of a new thing here. And I've seen owners come and go at all these trailer parks. And in the last 20 years, it's like nationwide, everybody's recognized there's ROI to be found in trailer courts. And so the whole attitude of the owners toward the trailer courts has changed dramatically. And all the while, the infrastructure is deteriorating. So this idea that a community can come together and own their own trailer court and then access funding that a private owner is not able to access to upgrade and to actually build a community there, that's a big deal. And that is a potential long-term solution for a lot of the trailer court communities. And then if we can change some of the building codes so that those trailers that are at the end of their life or beyond the end of their life can be replaced with something that is affordable in that space, you can maintain those viable communities at a cost of living that is within the limits of the folks we're talking about. So I'm really passionate about, don't let this opportunity go to waste. Water and wastewater at Forest Park, it can be fixed. And I'm guaranteed the folks are going to be much safer there in those homes with what they have. Granted, there are issues. They're going to be much safer from a public health and a sanitation situation than they would be on the street for sure. And maybe even in some other trailer courts that just aren't on the radar. So, there's issues in a lot of trailer courts. This is solvable. Okay, so anyways, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, thank you very much. James Thornton, Fairview Community Council. Appreciate all of your service, and we really do appreciate the acknowledgement by the administration of the offsite impacts of Fairview's experience historically with the Sullivan Arena, and because of the concentration of services that exist today. I'll make this fast. This is really an issue that doesn't have a lot of answers, and obviously a lot of people are against the idea of it coming into their neighborhood, which makes it really challenging. So we're really all going to have to put our heads together here and, out of the box thinking. I'd really implore the administration, the assembly, to please lobby the state for help here. We are Anchorage's hub, and a lot of this is a state issue. So again, I don't understand politics, but we have to get more assistance from our state for this issue, and also the private sector. I mean, a lot of us are offering to help however we can. I'm scooping poop every about the issues that I have, and this is with no Sullivan Arena. I'm scooping tons of poop, and again, we have porta potties over at 3rd Avenue. That's great. We've been asking for them along the Gambling corridor for a long time. Everybody poops. So, anyways, it's quality of life, and please, let's all work together and think out of the box here. I really love some of the ideas that I've heard about, just let's get those pallet shelters going. Let's just do it. Let's build it, call me, I'll be there. The time for action is now. Winter is coming. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we had one more person in the room. Welcome.
Hello. My name is Wood. I live directly across the street from the Sullivan Arena. And obviously I'm fed up. I've had my car broken into, it's stripped inside out. I got drug use in my yard. I got paraphernalia, alcohol bottles in my yard. I'm tired. So I'm here today to tell you that I am filing a TRO, temporary restraining order, and asking for a permanent injunction of ever using that arena again. Because you're not talking about the damage they have done to that building. Okay, every spring when they leave, they clog the entire septic system with their clothes, and it costs us $250,000. My wife works, and she's on the payroll, Sullivan Arena payroll. So we get all the information, what the damage is being done. They've ruined the ice rinks. So how is the hockey team going to play there since they've ruined the ice rink? They destroyed the plumbing and the ice plates. So how's the hockey team going to use that now? None of you guys are talking about this. What's going on? You guys block yourself from opening up the line. You guys constantly block. It doesn't matter who the mayor is. You guys just block yourselves. You block the mayor, and it's getting old. You need to work together. You work for us, and you need to take action. So I'm here today to tell you and assure you that you're not going to use that arena again. I promise you that. And if you doubt me, I've defeated Morrison and Mahoney LLP in the federal courts with their fancy law offices up and down the Eastern Seaboard and in London, England. If I can defeat them in federal court, your attorneys will be a cakewalk. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the phone. I understand there's one person on the phone who'd like to speak. So that is *6 for folks on the phone. If you can introduce yourself, I'll set your timer.
Hello, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is Ken McCarty. So I've been in on this meeting for the past 40 plus minutes as able to engage, but have not been able to connect till now. So I have plenty of questions, but I don't want to hold up the meeting longer than the 10 minutes that's been allotted for that. But one of the big questions is the collaboration of these other organizations, as mentioned, of the Christian Health Association representing the churches. But I have a number of churches in Eagle River and Chugiak that have been asking the question of what can the churches do, and yet they don't seem to be, or the question, well, what is the collaboration? Because they're bewildered how they could be engaged.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Cross.
Ken, there's a meeting on Monday. I'll send you an invite to the next community task force meeting for Forest Park. If you can extend that to your contacts, we'd greatly appreciate it. They're always welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cross, regarding that for the meeting at Forest Park. Again, the question is, what's the collaboration system that exists to let all the churches know how they can be involved?
Thank you so much, Mr. Riccardi, for your testimony. All right. Okay. I guess I'll just go ahead and confirm if there's anyone else who would like to speak. All right. Not seeing anyone, then we'll go ahead and close things up. let's go ahead and move on to committee discussion. Is there any discussion? All right. Otherwise, thanks everyone for a good meeting. We'll go ahead and meet again in August. And the big topic there will be the emergency cold weather shelter plan. And I look forward to really having that refined. Otherwise, look forward to July 25th when we're going to talk about the Golden Lion. And I imagine we'll probably be talking about Forest Park. Thanks, everyone. What's that?